My name is Margaret. I learned early that a woman can carry whole seasons inside her silence. You think betrayal arrives with thunder and glass. For me, it came with champagne flutes and a tagged photo at sunrise. My daughter, laughing on a marble terrace, captioned "New Beginnings." The dress fit her like a lie fits a liar. Perfectly. I knew then what I already suspected. She had found my secret 10 million, and she was spending it like a life she deserved. She had left when grief sat heavy on our table, and when the world felt brittle. She'd told me she needed space. She had not told me she would build her palace on my savings. I watched for a week before I moved. I watched because anger without a map is only noise. From the kitchen window, I saw men who once bowed when I passed, now bowing to her laughter in photos. I looked through the receipts she'd carelessly posted. A private jet, a villa with columns, a bracelet that ate a year's wages. The trust I had set up years ago, discreet, lawyered, a clause carefully folded in the margin, had a name, Margaret A.K. Trust. It was small print and ironclad, but it had been breached. I traced the breadcrumbs. A young bank officer with loose lips, a paralegal who liked designer shoes, a transfer that had been routed through a company with a name like Sea Blue Holdings. She had not been clever. She had been bold, which is sometimes worse. For 30 days I let her live like an empress. I let her parade it. I wanted to see the architecture of her confidence. You would call it cruelty. I called it reconnaissance. She invited men with clean cologne. They filmed her everywhere. She sent me thumbnails of a life I could no longer afford to grieve for. The second week, she posted a ring my dead husband had wanted to give her on a summer night. The stone was mine once, a promise turned pawn. The third week, a pilot I once helped when his engines failed thanked me in private for a favor he'd pull. I kept the favor in my back pocket. On the 31st morning, I woke before dawn and made one call. I said 3 words, activate clause 17. The trustee on the line, a man who'd once cried in my kitchen when his mother died and I'd given him bread, said, "Are you certain?" I heard the old river of his voice. "Yes," I said. "Do it now." It happened like weather. Within hours her cards were declined. The villa's concierge locked the door to her suite. Her private jet company called to say the contract was suspended pending verification. A boutique with her dress on the rack refused to release it without proof of payment. The men around her, who had loved the idea of wealth more than the woman wearing it, evaporated into texts that read like ink dried too late. Unavailable, call later, mistake. She called me then, breathless, the kind of call you hear from someone who has just realized the ropes have been pulled. "Mom," she said, voice raw, "my accounts, someone froze everything." I let her talk into silence for a moment, to make the panic expand, until it filled the room between us. Who would do such a thing? She asked, the question a plea I had never expected from her. "You tell me," I said softly. "Who do you think would have access?" She laughed then, a short, brittle sound. "You? Don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't even know Instagram if it bit you." That was when the cold, rational part of me took over. "I know enough," I said. "I know where the trust is. I know the clause you didn't read." When she finally slammed her luxury car into my gravel drive, the tires a scream against the dust I had turned by hand for decades, she came at me the way she'd always come when she wanted something, with rehearsed charm and a habit of leaning on my shoulder like a child. "Please," she said, "you have to fix this. I made mistakes. I can pay you back." She smelled of perfume and panic. "You made choices," I answered, "and choices have led you here." She fell to her knees on my kitchen tiles like a girl who'd remembered how to beg. For a second something in me softened. I could have forgiven, I suppose. I could have written a check and let the world go on. But forgiveness without consequence is an invitation. I am not a woman who teaches her child to take what is not hers. So I brought in the law. The trustee drafted court papers with a steady hand, while my lawyer, a man who owed me a childhood kindness, arranged injunctions and asset freezes. We followed the money where it ran, through shell companies, through accounts with names that shifted like masks. Auditors came with their small precision, like surgeons with pens. The boutique, facing subpoenas, returned a crate of unpaid goods. The jet company produced manifests that matched transfers flagged as irregular. She was good at spending. She was terrible at hiding. I did not revel in the collapse. There are nights I held my hands and thought about the little girl who used to braid my hair and hide my glasses, who once cut her hand on a tin and cried until I sang. The rage I felt had an undercurrent of grief. When the tax office came knocking, asking for records of undeclared income, she screamed betrayal publicly and quietly texted lawyers who advised her to stop. She tried to smear me with social media posts, glossy videos, tearful monologues about an evil mother. But the accounts and the paperwork were louder than performative sorrow. The bank's letter said, in bureaucratic finality, assets frozen pending investigation. All assets frozen. She lashed out. She accused me in voices that echoed through my hallways like thrown stones. You hoarded it. You hid it. You never told me. She wanted the audience to think she had been a hapless victim of secrecy. The truth is, my secrecy was survival. I had hidden that money because my husband and I believed in a rainy day fund, not because we wanted to be mysterious. She had spent it as if the rain would never fall. There was an afternoon that I'll keep even though it smells of humiliation. For her, not for me. She came to the city to see a bank manager under the hot, indifferent air of the marble lobby. He was a man in a gray suit with a tie that had no pattern because he wanted to avoid trouble. She stood there with a woman who used to be comfortable in velvet and said to him, voice loud enough for a lobby to hear, "You are making a mistake. My mother is cruel." The manager folded his hands, opened an envelope, and slid printed pages across the desk. Bank transfers, dates, names of companies, a note where my handwriting matched signatures authorizing transfers out of an account I had the legal right to control. She watched the ink like it was a verdict. When the auditors traced the trail to a nominee company registered last year, my daughter tried to call favors. Men who owed her nothing refused. The pilot she'd flown with had his own contract reviewed. The man who'd bought her a ring had his accounts audited. Men who had been willing to dance on the stage with her turned away when law and ledger laid down the rules. Her friends were thin as paper. Only those who had been paid in tiny kindnesses, merchants who had once sold me sugar on credit, looked at her with a muttered, "I remember when." In the weeks that followed, headlines bloomed like bruises. Trust drained, daughter's luxury tumble, assets frozen, one read, stark and official. That morning reporters came to my lane, not because I wanted spectacle, but because truth has a way of breathing into empty spaces. I answered their questions with the dry, neutral voice of someone who understands the weight of facts. I set the trust to protect the family, I said. When it was used without consent, legal action was necessary. There was a moment, later, that belonged to human things. She sat on my old porch steps, shoulders shaking, and said, "I was lost. I thought the money would give me the life I wanted." She looked so small, like a doll whose seam had split. Her voice was raw, but the apology came like smoke, thin, and not entirely real. I remembered holding her through a fever, singing nonsense lullabies, promising her we would be okay. That memory made me ache. It did not make me blind. I demanded accountability, not vengeance. She would not have the luxury of anonymity while she paid back what she could. Under the trustee's supervision, assets were returned where possible. Contracts were voided. She had to sign documents admitting to irregular transfers and consenting to a repayment plan that would take years. There were conditions: community service, public letters of apology, and regular check-ins. The village learned the truth not from my vindictiveness, but from the careful paperwork that made lies impossible to sustain. In the end, what did I win? I won back what my husband and I built together. The farmhouse where the floorboards remember small feet, the pump that made the fields sing, the jar of receipts my husband used to keep in the drawer. I won dignity. I won the knowledge that being kind isn't a weakness, but that kindness needs boundaries. My daughter lost a life of easy glamour and gained something harder: consequence. Now, sometimes she calls. Her voice is softer, threaded with the small patient thing that time teaches: humility. We talk in practicalities at first, then in the small everyday things: a recipe, the name of a neighbor who needs help, the price of fertilizer. Rebuilding, she learns, is not about gowns or hotels. It is about time returned in service, hours spent mending what was torn. I listen, cautious but open. If she wants to rebuild trust, she must show up. If she wants to parent her mistakes, she must do the work. If there is a moral, it is this: never underestimate a woman who keeps a ledger in her heart. We know the names of the men who sign away favors. We remember the tiny kindnesses that were paid and the small cruelties that were not. We will not always shout. Sometimes we wait, and then we make one patient, precise call, and everything changes. If this story moved something in you, do what helps us tell these quiet truths. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear that patience can be a weapon and mercy can be an education. And subscribe to Sins Repaid for more tales where justice is slow, clean, and final.